Hi everybody, it's Mr. Fusion, the most viewed YouTuber of 2025 by at least 2 people. I know this because they told me. It's been a while since I have done one of these, so I am back with another look at Dragon Ball character names and how they have been adapted into English by the major players of Dragon Balldom. Dragon Balldom? Today, let's talk about the nefarious Freeza and his evil goons, since that's someone who never seems to stay away very long. In fact, he might be back right now. Over in Dragon Ball Dissection, my main Dragon Ball review and analysis series, which is currently covering the Resurrection F story arc from Dragon Ball Super. You should go watch it. Okay, I'm done with my very natural cross-promotion. Let's get to it. Frieza is actually incredibly simple, or it really should be, but for a multitude of reasons, it isn't. And that complication starts with Toriyama Akira himself. It's tough coming up with names for a lot of characters. If you group the names into sets, it's easier to think of them. For example, the one in control of the Saiyans and other villainous aliens is Frieza. Strictly speaking, Frieza is a freezer, but I envisioned a refrigerator when I named him, so I grouped the names according to foods that go inside it. So this gets more complicated because technically the character is more of a refrigerator than a freezer, but I think you get the point. I'm so excited about this one because explaining Frieza was one of the first things I ever did in Dragon Ball Dissection all the way back in 2012, and now I get to update it with my fancy 2026 graphics package. So, like many Dragon Ball names, Frieza comes from taking an English word, converting it into Japanese phonetics, modifying it in some way, and then returning it back to English. So, as the man himself says, Frieza comes from freezer, which is like a refrigerator but colder. So freezer in Japanese phonetics is Freeza, with a fu because there is no standalone f sound in Japanese. The elongated e sound is obvious, and the elongated ah at the end approximates the sound in the original word. So for the character's name, Toriyama simply chops off the last elongated vowel sound, changing Frieza to Frieza. That's a very minor modification, so returning this to English phonemes should be pretty simple. And it is. All the major English localizers agree. This is Frieza. Wait a second. One of these things is not like the other. Yes, despite Frieza simply being freezer with the chopped off, the most common way of spelling this in English is Frieza, due to Funimation's dub having spelled it that way since 1997. It's a change that really doesn't serve much of a purpose or logistical sense. Maybe it was easier to trademark. Frieza is a modified freezer, but that's not where the modification is. And for fans who don't necessarily follow Funimation's dub, the seemingly arbitrary nature of this spelling can be met with derision and humor.
So, you must be Frieza.
Actually, it's Lord Freeza.
Really? Then why is there an I in it?
There isn't.
And to be clear, I don't spell it Frieza either. I spell it Freeza like Viz and like Funimation's own subtitles traditionally have. But I actually tend to think about this one the way I think about Broly with an I or Broly with a Y. I've made my choice, and I can back up my reasoning, but I'm not too fussed about it either way. Frieza sounds exactly the same. It looks enough the same that the joke isn't lost. Nobody is going to be confused about which character you're talking about regardless of which spelling you use. It's not ideal, but it's fine. The only times it gets frustrating or funny is when the two spellings butt up against each other, like when Funimation's subtitles contrast with Funimation's title cards, or when Dragon Ball Super simulcast subtitles conformed to dub spellings and disagreed with what's actually seen in the show. I've held on to this screen cap for nearly 9 years because I just thought it was so funny. Let's see what other foods are kept in the freezer, or the refrigerator, or the cold box, whatever. How about this guy, everybody's favorite Frieza henchman? Well, it's this guy's favorite henchman, so much so that he got to voice him in Dragon Ball Z Abridged.
This one's for Ichipei.
Like with Frieza, it's taking the name of a fruit, modifying it a bit, and spitting it back out. In this case, it's an apple, which is converted into Japanese as Appule, with this little guy right here indicating the consonant is extended. Toriyama takes that, swaps the emphasis from the consonant to the following vowel, Apuru. And it's so simple that nearly everyone agrees. This is Apool. Okay, so we have deviation from Funimation again. At least according to the credits on my copy of Dragon Box Z Volume 2, Funimation spells the name Apool, at least in 2010, which completely misses the point, although it sounds the same. We might have found one of the few Funimation dub naming choices that did not proliferate into the wider English-speaking fandom. I searched for the character, and it is Appule that comes up. In fact, if I purposely search for Dragon Ball Apool, it asks me, did you mean to search for Dragon Ball Pools? Well, that could be because later that same year, by the time the dub of Dragon Ball Kai, or Dragon Ball Z Kai as they call it, aired, they were suddenly crediting this character as Appule. I gotta say, this has been my biggest surprise writing this script. Thank you, my Patreon Discord friends, for helping me out on this one. Now, before Frieza, there were the Saiyans, or Saiyajin, which, as we covered in an earlier names video, is an anagram of yasai, the Japanese word for vegetable. Toriyama worked backwards from that to come up with Frieza. But what to do about Frieza guys who aren't Saiyans? Well, as Appule demonstrates, he decided he could name them after fruits. But maybe some of those fruits aren't as apparent as others. Like this guy, Dodoria. What's his deal? Everybody agrees on this name, but where does it come from? Well, a clue is in what Dodoria looks like. He's big and round and spiky. He's a durian. That big, round, spiky fruit that Mario kicks around in Super Mario Sunshine, because that's a topical reference for me to make. It's definitely a tropical reference for me to make. In Japan, it's known as a dorian. Toriyama takes that, chops off the and doubles the do. And there you go, Dodoria. Don't have to change a thing, it's just right there. What about the pretty boy, the wearer of Potara before they were Potara? What kind of fruit is he? No, that's not what I mean. Don't you dare say a word. Once again, we have more Japanese wordplay instead of English wordplay. There's a citrus fruit called the pomelo, which in Japan is called a Zarbon. You can already see where this is going, can't you? Toriyama takes Zarbon and draws out that first vowel to Zarbon. This looks familiar, doesn't it? I call this a reverse Frieza, although upon reflection I probably shouldn't. In that case, we were taking an extended vowel sound and shortening it, while here we're taking a short vowel sound and lengthening it. So if Frieza comes from freezer, then it makes sense that Zarbon becomes Zarbon. And everyone agrees. Simple and clean. That's the way that he's making me feel with such an easy name. And geez, this is too easy. Where's the drama if everybody agrees? Well, why don't we have a little fun here by doing a thought experiment? While Zarbon is the best way to represent the actual name, most English speakers aren't going to understand the joke because they don't know what a Zarbon is. Could this or should this be adapted into an equivalent English-based joke, like Pokemon names? Heck, even Viz took Pui Pui and adapted it into Pocus, a magic word English speakers would recognize, to fit with characters like Dabra. So couldn't this be adapted into something based on Pomelo? Pomelo? Pumelo? No, probably not that one. It could have happened. Why not? And if not, if Zarbon is fine as it is, why change other proper names into English jokes? And nobody's ever had a problem with Pikachu, which is complete Japanese onomatopoeia that basically means zap squeak. I'm not giving an answer, it's just food for thought. A pomelo for thought, if you will. I think we've had enough fruit in our diet for today. How's about we move to another section of the food pyramid? The Ginyu Tokusentai, or Ginyu Special Squadron, are special because they're named after dairy products. Not only are they super powerful and super campy, they are super effective against fighters who are lactose intolerant. They also feature enough translation variation that we finally have some names to sink our teeth into. Not this one though. Ginyu is another Japanese-based name. The word for milk in Japan is Ginyu, which Toriyama changes to Ginyu. And everybody seems to agree on this one, even that the extended final vowel can be inferred in English without explicitly representing it. It's also worth pointing out that the first kanji in Ginyu is the same kanji in Gyumao, the Ox Demon King, since that's the kanji for cattle. Cows make milk, it's all perfectly logical. All the rest of the Ginyu have English-based name puns, which is fun for us. But that might not be obvious to a lot of fans because of, well, Funimation's dubs of the animated Dragon Ball series. Yeah, we're finally getting to some names that can cause a bit of a problem. But it is interesting. I wouldn't call any of them horrible or complete made-up gibberish. There's no Celipa becoming Fascia here. The renderings tend to be okay simply on a sound and spelling level, but Funimation didn't seem to be aware of the meanings, so all of them were lost in translation to varying degrees. You'll see what I mean. First, there's this little time-stopping freak. He's named after yogurt, which is rendered in Japanese as yoguruto. Toriyama chops off the yo and changes the unvoiced to to a voiced do. Gurudo. So here's where the interpretation comes in, because in words like this, you typically have to make choices as to which vowel sounds are extraneous and can be elided over, and which ones should be kept. Viz's translated manga seemed aware of the yogurt connection, that it's yogurt minus the yo, so Gurt, and then Gurt with a voiced final sound. Gurd is what they go with. Steve Simmons' official subtitles for Funimation definitely understood that too, but he ended up going with the YOGHURT spelling of yogurt, more common outside of the US, and so named him Gurd with an H. Funimation's dub translators, on the other hand, went in a different direction. They elided different vowels. And remember that what we romanize as a Japanese R can be adapted into an English R or L. And they went with L. So they call him Guldo. And you can see how that's perfectly logical based simply on the sounds. It just doesn't convey yogurt at all. It's the telephone game. You start in a certain place, make changes along the way, and by the end it's become somewhat unrecognizable. Now for me, when I was covering the Frieza arc in Dragon Ball Dissection, I found myself in a bit of a bind, believe it or not. I agree that Gurd avoids the telephone game problem and conveys the meaning, but I don't think it sounds all that much like Gurudo. I actually think Guldo sounds much closer, but fails to convey the meaning or represent the sounds it's based on. I always like to try to represent both sound and meaning as best as I can, so I ended up splitting the difference and calling him Gurdo. To me, it sounds a bit closer, and the final altered kana from the original yogurt at least gives me some semblance of justification for keeping the extraneous vowel sound. It just makes me feel slightly more at ease. That said, I was definitely nervous at the time that I was running off on my own with no one more skilled than me to back me up. That was closing on 10 years ago though, and I can't recall a single time anyone has ever called me out on this. And believe me, I get called out for a lot. I can only guess that nobody cares enough about this character to care what his name is supposed to be. He's always been the Chaozu of telekinetic aliens. Next up is the mop-headed eraser gun using Big Booty Boy. His name is based on cream. In fact, it's simply an anagram of cream. We start with Kuriimu and flip it around until we get Rikuumu. This is one of those interesting cases where Japanese anagrams create sounds that are different than what would happen with an English anagram. The chompu, which elongates sounds, gets disconnected from the ri and gets hooked up to the ku. So yeah, that's why a name based on cream ends up having a big ku sound in the middle, which doesn't sound anything like cream. Isn't language wacky? But the good news is that this one ends up pretty simple. Everyone essentially agrees that this is Recoome. There are, however, slight differences in presentation. For example, Viz decides to write the first syllable with an EA to reflect the spelling of cream. That's what I go with too. Like I said, I don't think Funimation's dub understood the assignment. Unlike our other contestants, they only use an E, which is not like cream. They also tend to pronounce it with a shorter vowel sound, more like Recoome than Reacoom. But since the Japanese name takes away the longer vowel sound, there actually is some justification for this. Of all the English-based Ginyu, I think this is their best one. For the Funimation subtitles, Steve Simmons really wants you to know this is cream, so while he spells it the same as Viz, he does so in a camel case style, capitalizing the C in the middle, as if it was the first letter. It's an odd choice, but it also works. Next up is the useless blue speedster. No, not Sonic, what's wrong with you? That's not even the same, whatever. You may not know which blue character is which, but I think you've probably followed the patterns by now and can guess what dairy product this guy's name is based on. That's right, it's butter, which is rendered in Japanese as Butta, extending that last vowel sound to approximate the sound like we've seen so many times today. This is another simple switch, moving the extension from the last vowel to the first vowel, becoming Bata. Once again, we mostly have a decent amount of consensus here, with Viz, the subtitles, and me rendering this as Butta, butter with a shortened vowel sound in the grand Freeza tradition. Funimation's dub, however, calls him Burter, which I'd say is still in the ballpark. If I tell you his name is based on butter, you can definitely see the influence there. They drift away from Toriyama's alteration by keeping that buttery sound at the end. On the other hand though, Burter actually accounts better for the altered first vowel sound, I have to admit. Would Butta be the best compromise? See, I feel like that's starting to drift a bit too far from the pronunciation and obscures the meaning. And that's why sometimes perfection can be difficult to attain, and why I still think Butta is the best all-rounder. But which do you think is the better butterball collector? Speaking of balls, we finally have our pantsless Crusher Ball King. Maybe that sounds cheesy, but if it does, it's appropriate because he's named after cheese. But after Toriyama makes his substitutions, will he become just another processed cheese product? Cheese is approximated in Japanese as chiizu. Toriyama swaps out the unvoiced chi for the voiced ji, and the voiced zu for the unvoiced su. That leaves the character's name as Jeice. Just like before, only the dub stands alone. Everyone else renders the first sound as JH to better reflect the H in cheese. The dub, however, calls him Jeice, which, while spelled a little fancy, just reads to me like a regular person's name. I knew a Jeice growing up. It's definitely drifted, both in pronunciation and in reflecting the meaning. I'd honestly assume his name was based on juice before I assumed it was based on cheese. I'm not saying that Jheese doesn't run into a slight problem though. See, cheese is written with an S, but it's pronounced like a Z. It's not entirely intuitive based on the spelling that this should be pronounced Jeice and not Jheese, as in geez, names are so complicated. I guess you could spell it Jheece, but then you've really gotten away from it being recognizable as cheese. So I guess we're just banking on you being able to figure out it's not Z, which isn't too hard if you're listening to the show's dialogue. Okay, time to close the Refrigifreezer. I'm stuffed. There are definitely other Frieza characters I could dig into. After all, there were blueberry pun names years before you came along, little missy. Where did I first make that joke? I don't even remember anymore. Help fix my memory by posting a comment. But anyway, I think you get the idea. We all learned a lot today, I'm sure. Hopefully you have a better idea of how these Dragon Ball translating entities made the decisions they made, even if you don't agree with all of them. I know I had fun. Thanks as always to Kanzenshuu for hosting such a great collection of information, including interviews and episode guides. And even though it's over 15 years old, I still constantly go back to Herms's name pun roundup thread on the Kanzenshuu forums. It has been an easy to go to quick reminder so many times when I've been working on Dragon Ball dissection. It includes source spellings and Toriyama quotes for his confirmations and reasonings behind names. I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants here. Definitely send some Patreon subscriptions Kanzenshu's way. And if you still can after that, please send some my way. As always, let me know what you think. If you want me to keep adding to this collection of name videos, suggest some characters I should do next time. And I will see you next time.